Habari, hola, ciao, ni hao, bonjour, and hello. Welcome to episode 57 of the ESG Show. I thought I would start today by having a quick look at what's been going on in the world over the last few weeks. But you know what? There's not much to happen, really. There's not much to talk about. It's been a very quiet couple of weeks, I think. Except that the US has pulled out of the Paris Agreement and 24 US states are committed to Paris Agreement goals. And Michael Bloomberg has said Bloomberg Philanthropies and other US climate funders will ensure the United States meets its global climate obligations. But apart from that, it's been very, very quiet, I think. Hardly anything's happened. Apart from DEI is under fire in the US, Amazon and Meta have reined back on their DEI, but Apple has urged shareholders to reject an anti-DEI motion. And US government workers have been told to report DEI efforts or face consequences. But apart from that, it's been pretty quiet. Not much has happened, really. Apart from I saw this very strange social media post. I don't really understand it or what it's about. Maybe you can explain to me. It says, "Yes, officer, I did rob the bank, but before I did, though, I said I opened my heart to you, so everything is okay." I don't know what that's all about, but anyway, everything's fine in the world, unless you live in Greenland, Denmark, Canada, Colombia, and Mexico. I suppose. Looking further afield, China's population fell for a third consecutive year last year, but China has also announced that it installed 8 gigawatts of solar in Belt and Road countries in 2024. And looking further east, interest rate in Japan increased to 0.5%, which is the highest level since 2008. And if memory serves me correct, something happened in the autumn of 2008. A lot of people are associating higher interest rates in Japan with the unwinding of the carry trade, something else that was associated with the 2008 crash. And talking about stock market crashing, the value of tech stocks fell by $1 trillion earlier this week, but has since recovered somewhat. But this is quite interesting. The Deep Seek product that's been getting all this publicity, which is open source, although of course the data isn't open source, has quite interesting implications for sustainability because it's a much more efficient use of energy. Now, the carbon footprint of AI has been a common theme on the AI show, and it's a complex topic. But what is clear is that AI uses a lot of energy and is likely to increase very, very rapidly over the next few years, possibly even more rapidly than the rollout of renewables. But if my understanding of DeepSeek is correct, that could reverse all that, and you could actually see a reversal at this trend of a massive increase in electricity usage by AI, unless, of course, cheaper AI means a massive increase in the use of it. Anyway, that's enough about that. Let's meet today's guests. And on the show today, we have Anita. Hello, Anita. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. And Anita, the common theme, if I try to stop these things from appearing on the screen, I've done it. A common theme, the theme of today's show is leadership. And in this era of controversy, is AI dying? And I like to get straight in there and ask you that question. Is AI dying?
Fair enough. It is a question worthy of a response. Well, I think the acronym is certainly getting attention. Inherently, ESG is about thinking about long-term social and environmental considerations, but it has become something of a political football, driven by short-term news cycles and excessive focus on differences between groups in society. But whatever the letters of the alphabet, we still need to find solutions to the big problems touched on the climate crisis, cost of living crisis, migration crisis, growing inequality, and loss of biodiversity. So the rhetoric around matters such as EDI do little to really solve the global problems that we're facing. The climate crisis is impacting some of the most vulnerable people across the world. Communities that were affected by the LA wildfires were not those who had second or third homes, but those who were at the lower echelons of the social ladder, the disabled, those who could not afford insurance. So without leadership, which recognizes that people's long-term well-being requires global cooperation to deal with these global challenges, sustainability is at risk.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to call all the other guests now and ask them to join the discussion. Apologies, we do seem to have an echo this morning, and it's difficult to work out why. But anyhow, does anybody else have anything to add to the discussion? Is ESG dying? Anyone who wants to go first on that one?
I'm happy to jump in, Michael. So it's here from Australia, and I think one of the ways to stop the echo is if you want it yourself. So it's a great comment from one of your listeners. I would say ESG is not dying; it's evolving, and in many ways, the evolution is necessary. So the current criticism and skepticism around ESG is basically a reflection of growing pains, I would say, rather than like a death knell. ESG has moved from being a bit of a niche concept to a mainstream business imperative, right? So we need to recognize fundamentally that ESG is facing challenges because it's fundamentally disruptive. It challenges the traditional ways of doing business by asking organizations to consider long-term risks, opportunities that aren't always and immediately quantifiable. So while some might resist this change, others are stepping up and using ESG as a framework for innovation, resilience, and also competitive advantage. So I guess my comment would be if your question is ESG dying? The answer is no. It's being tested, challenged, refined. And that's exactly what it needs to mature and drive that transformative impact that it was designed to deliver. So that would be my feedback.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Hopefully the echo receded when I muted myself. Does anybody else want to pick up on the topic of ESG dying before we drill in a little bit more depth? Okay, well, shall we move on? So I wanted to talk about, if you could just excuse me here, there's a lot going on right now. Could you just excuse me while I just find myself? Um, so you won't be surprised to learn that I am a big believer in climate change, but also happen to believe that the economic cost of defeating climate change needs not to be onerous. In fact, I go further and think, even if you ignore the future costs of climate change, we will be better off thanks to new green technologies such as renewables and EVs than if we were carrying on as we were previously, if we went down the business as usual plate. To me, the biggest threat to defeating climate change is collective stupidity. I often think humanity behaves as a death wish. Max, what do you think? Is there such a thing as...
That's an interesting question, Michael. I hope that you can hear me because I also have a big echo here today. But I mean, in history, we've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of moments where collective stupidity has brought us to the brink of what we thought was humanly possible. And when it comes to ESG or sustainability, and especially with the latest societal polarizations, with more right-wing governments also coming into power right now, I think that unfortunately, all of the existential crises that we are facing, like the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and also the water crisis, are still hard for many people to grasp. And because these issues often feel intangible, especially for those unfortunately, in the Western world, where many haven't been directly affected yet, they assume we still have time. And that's where this collective stupidity, if you ask me, comes from. So I think the real question is, when will the pain for enough people be great enough to end this collective stupidity? And hopefully by then, it won't be too late to also turn things around, because we're getting dangerously close to reaching many crucial tipping points for our ecosystems.
Okay, so the question is, um, will collective stupidity go away in time? Now, how much of an issue here is social media? We hear an awful lot about social media and the echo chambers that it creates. Anita, what are your thoughts about the threats posed by social media?
Well, social media per se is not the problem. Touching on extremism, for example, that existed long before social media. But the current social unease or unrest is not helped by leadership focusing on the short term, whether that be elections or profits, and some narratives portraying certain groups to blame for the crises that we're facing, whether these groups be the elite, migrants, or groups defined by their sexual orientation, their race, their religion. On the principles that we are agreed on generally, on equality, civil society groups have used social media as a means to collaborate and organize themselves across the world. That was clear after the marches following the images of George Floyd killing. It went across the world, and social media was a force in that. So, in summary, social media can be a force for good or it can be a force for bad. It depends on whether it's a force for good. I think it's a function of whether it's inclusive, collaborative, respectful, or at the other end, less tolerant of each other's views, and diversity in terms of society, and stereotyping and discrimination. And the key point is, particularly as we're thinking one to the long term in sustainability, but future generation, also how do we protect children? How do we ensure that they become part of this conversation, but there are child safeguarding measures in place, and some of the big organizations have responsibilities to make sure that that is the case.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, anybody else wants to come in on the issue of the social media? Um, okay, so do speak up or raise your hand if you have something to say. I have something to say about this, because I believe that all of us, including me, by the way, absolutely including me, are biased creatures, and we are susceptible to all kinds of manipulation. I also think we behave differently in groups. Um, in fact, I go further than that, and say that um, I go further than that and say that groupthink is a very pervasive thing. I think it's a lot more common than people realize. There's a concept called group polarization. Studies show if you get a number of risk-averse individuals together and put them in a group, then that group becomes terrified of making any decisions whatsoever. Equally, if you get a number of people who take the mild gamble every now and again, ever so slightly minded to take the odd risk, put them in a group together, and that group becomes an insane risk taker. And I do think that is a phenomenon that's going on at the moment. I think that social media is really we're seeing this group polarization, and I think it's a big threat. But anyhow, moving on, Julian, you were telling me that um, we can learn a lot from tribes. Can you sort of expand on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. The story started basically 2 years ago, which was on quite close to home for the pup a few years back. And before I didn't really know what to expect. And I just ended up spending a lot of time talking to people. and more specifically, indigenous groups. And what I find interesting is that those groups, we tend to see them, they are kind of like visible, especially in those kind of events. But I think we kind of struggle to understand them. So I sat for hours with many of them and tried to listen to the many stories they were telling me. And I continue actually doing that many years after the COP. And it makes me realize that actually we have so much to learn from them. Coming from the West, I think we have a tendency to think that we know it all and that our predatory model is actually the winning one. But I think it's very short-sighted. Those indigenous groups understand, I think, the world very well. They understand that living is about balance, that all living forms have equal importance, and that you should never take more than what you need. And I strongly believe that we should start to reconnect with those groups wherever they are. And surprisingly, you have those groups everywhere, even in Europe, and really start to be humble and understand how they see the world. And I really believe that they are an endless source of wisdom for us to basically act and live more sustainability. And I would really start to encourage people to be more humble and looking actually at the developing world and at those kind of like communities from which we can so much learn from.
Okay, thank you for that, Julian. And Julian, while I've got you here, could you briefly intro yourself? Super briefly.
Yeah.
I think so. Starting from now.
No, absolutely, Michael. Hi, everybody. I've been working in sustainability and startup for a couple of years now, leading sustainability efforts and supporting startups in their growth journey.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I'd like to bring Lizzie back on. And before I ask you a question, Lizzie, I'm going to briefly introduce you. So this is Lizzie Swias, who has over 12 years of experience in leadership positions at multinational companies like Booking.com and IBM, and more than a decade of Zen practice and teaching. Lizzie Swias is passionate about building businesses that stand the test of time and work towards the good for all. As an advisor, consultant, and speaker, she focuses on helping businesses align with the principles of nature to build lasting, resilient models for success. Lizzie is on a mission to help companies align their strategies with the wisdom of nature, fostering lasting success through sustainable and nature-connecting business models. Through her work, she has become a guide for leaders who want to build resilient, purpose-driven businesses that honour and include the natural world. So, Lizzie, I want to ask you. You were talking about how leaders need to be connected to nature. Can you sort of expand upon that a little bit? Don't forget to come off mute.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can hear me properly.
But yes, and I think it's actually a really good follow-on on what Julian was saying as well about tribes and our ancestors, because they really understood that survival really depends on connection, and not only to your group, but also to the environment and nature itself. And if you go back all those years, those tribes, those groups, they and still see and saw themselves as part of the ecosystem and not separate from it. And that's a perspective I think we've lost in modern leadership and society, where we view things from a perspective of control and fit, and very mechanical in parts. We can everything in parts instead of looking at the holistic movement that we see. And you see back in how leaders operate. They operate often in silos, not only from departments, but also in a silo in their mindset and how they look and view the world, but also disconnected from their own essence and their own purpose, and disconnected from nature. And this really creates that gap between their decision making and their broader impact on the world. What we really need to do is shift to from that isolated, more anthropocenic worldview to a much more ecocentric one, where we recognize that we are all part of a larger whole, a larger system. And if you start as a leader to connect to nature, then you will benefit so much. There are so many studies that show that spending time in nature, it reduces stress. It improves creativity by 50%. It also enhances your problem problem solving skills. And so leaders who are able to connect with their own essence and with nature, they are people and leaders that come from a place of feeling more relaxed and very good equipped to navigate this complexity that we are living in. And by doing that, they foster collaboration, they drive sustainable innovation and really long-term decision making that benefit the bottom line, but also long-term success for the business. So groups can polarize, but leaders really have that power to guide them towards that connection with nature and the shared purpose, that possibility that we have as humankind. And that all starts, if you ask me, with reconnecting with the natural world, where all these lessons are just available if you are willing to listen to them. Yes, Michael?
Sorry, guys. Forgot to go off mute. Basic error. I was just saying thank you for that, Lizzie. You've had some good feedback, and Julian's had some nice feedback as well. I'd like to bring Anita back for a couple of minutes. But first, I think I need to introduce you properly, Anita. Anita Panwani is a qualified ESG professional with a master's degree in global governance and ethics. Her experience spans the not-for-profit public and private sectors. She was interviewed by the BBC and CNBC during the global pandemic. As founder and chair of the IRM's ESG group, she is focused on thought leadership in managing risks associated with inequality, modern slavery, as well as social and environmental protection. So, Nita, I was hoping we could step back a little bit. Can you give us a kind of put everything in a global context?
Sure. The
big challenges that we face do not respect national boundaries, despite all the framing at the moment of a lot of these problems, as we saw with the coronavirus. And that was an example of where international bodies, as well as national and multinational corporations, pharmaceutical corporations, and people in communities, particularly in terms of their voluntary contributions, people across the world work together to address this global challenge. So we need leaders who recognize that we need to be operating at all these levels if we're going to come up with sustainable development solutions that address the root causes of the big challenges that we're facing. We need to, as I mentioned, bring in the best talents and work with communities across the world. We need to respect laws and we need to work to the principle that everyone is equal. And it's very much a challenge. At the current rate of progress, it will take 131 years for girls and women to achieve equality. Greta Thunberg, in my view, is a leader in terms of ESG. And she takes this perspective. She takes a global perspective and she understands the concerns around inequality and the root causes that are bringing about the climate crisis that we're facing. So that's the sort of perspective that we need in terms of taking a global perspective.
Okay, thank you for that, Anita. I'd like to bring everybody else back. Who I just removed. We don't seem to have any females on the stage, so you're all back. Thought we could play a game of hot and cold. Hot means, yeah, you absolutely agree with my statement. Cold means, not so sure about that. So hot or cold, 30 seconds explanation. I read once that these days, a good leader is like a conductor of an orchestra, setting direction, engaging with your team, and empowering individual. Is that right? Who wants to go first?
Happy to take a stab, Michael. You like? Just start. Sorry, I shouldn't have used the word stab, but so hot, I would say, absolutely. 30 seconds or less, I would say. I think a great leader today is very much like a conductor because setting the vision, which is the musical score, kind of aligning the team, depending on team size, the orchestra, and you're empowering each of them to really excel in their role while ensuring there's harmony across the group. So it's really about creating synergy rather than micromanaging. So for me, it's super duper hot. It's just on mute, Michael. Strike two.
I beg your pardon. Does anybody else want to answer that question?
And I'll bring it out next.
Please go for it.
Sure, because if you ask me, then a leader ability within an organization, first and foremost, a manager of change. As we've seen it also in the past 30 years already with the digital transformation, the sustainable transformation, as well, is impacting most business model at its core. So the task of the sustainability leader is nothing short of transforming the company culture again towards a more sustainable first culture, because this is the only way how sustainability can be embedded at the core of the organization, meaning in every department, and finally then also into the people's job descriptions, because in the end, organization is a sum of people, and to succeed, a big percentage of the people needs to be educated and understand how they can contribute.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Max. Third attempt at getting rid of the mute button. I would like to see whether anybody else wants to come in on that question of a good leader being like a conductor of an orchestra and empowering the thing. Anita, you have no I'll let Anita go, and then I'll bring you on, Julia. Okay.
Very quickly, Freaky, in terms of a global governance framing, orchestration is a key word in terms of bringing in different actors from different organizations with different specialities. So absolutely key. Very, very hot.
Yeah, I mean, to build on what was said, I think what was very hot as well. But maybe I would also add that we have a tendency to see the leaders are the top of the organization, really kind of have that centerpiece. But often we see a lot of leaders in hidden functions, or people who are more kind of like at the back. And if I take the example of the orchestra, maybe one of the very strong leader in that orchestra is also the person who is, managing the sounds on the backstage. And so I would also encourage people to see leaders in other people that often don't have the light on them.
Yeah, and to quickly build on that, also very hot. But I think, when Julian says very right, and the leaders understand this, also understands that one of the most important qualities actually of being that conductor is listening, and open listening, and really taking that to connect that group and to fine tune where in that group, where in that system is needed, and that will also connect that group to that larger purpose. So for me, yes, and add listening.
Okay, thank you for that, Lizzie. I suppose if the conductor of an orchestra isn't listening, then you really do have a problem. Got another question for you now. Hierarchy. Is the command structure dead, or is it making a comeback? Who wants to have a go at that question first? Anita, go for it.
You just need to ask for any organizational chart, and it's typically hierarchical. I think the reality is we're not going to be able to change the nature of the way in which organizations are depicted, but we need to recognize, and this is as a risk professional, you need to cut across the hierarchical boundaries and the boundaries of the organization to look more broadly. And that requires perceiving the way in which we work as networks predominantly. So it's a change of perception, but hierarchy still exists.
Okay, thank you for that. Am I off mute? I think I am. Anybody else want to come in on that topic?
Yeah.
Lizzie?
Yeah. So I do believe that, especially when you look at bigger corporations, there probably is a lot of hierarchy. Yes, but what I see around me, this is where I work with, is that there's a big shift in hierarchy. Yes, there's still a leader that kind of sets the vision, develops the vision, but decision making is really increasingly decentralized, really allowing teams to act with agility. And new business models like stewardship models, they really invite different governance structures, different ways of working together and collaborating. So is it dead? Is it making a comeback? I'm not sure. There will always be some form of hierarchy needed, not in the traditional sense.
Okay, thank you for that. And anybody else want to come in on the issue of the hierarchy? All right. Well, next question ties in with the theme of today's show, which is ESG dying? But this time, I want to ask the question: is DEI dying? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, is it dying? Who wants to have a go at answering that question?
Happy to take or start here. Well, so in the spirit of being warm and being cold, I'm feeling quite warm about DEI, but in a state of kind of resting and recalibrating. It's definitely not dead, but it is at a crossroads. We've got the backlash. You showed a couple of slides at the start, at this claims of certain initiatives that have forced organizations, to really reassess their approach. I believe the emphasis is really shifting from surface level diversity metrics to really creating deeper systemic change. So it's all about embedding DEI into business practices and really measuring meaningful impact. So if anything, it's a moment of reflection. And for many, I think it's a chance to move from a nice to have to really a must have strategy. So that's my view.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else want to come in on that? I see you're nodding away, Lizzie. Does that? Oh, Max has put his hand up, so I'll let you go first.
So I should go first. Thank you so much, Michael. I mean, hot or cold, regardless of the term, I see many companies, as Kaushik right now said, moving beyond the surface level initiatives to embed DEI into business strategy because sustainability leaders increasingly see DEI as essential to driving innovation and resilience, recognizing that diverse perspectives are critical to addressing environmental and social problems. So in my opinion, the current shift reflects a maturity or maturation phase, moving beyond checkbox initiatives to embedding DEI into long-term strategies and measurable outcomes.
Okay, thank you for that. And Lizzie, you've been nodding away there. Do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, because I strongly agree with what already mentioned, so nothing else to add there.
Okay, so then, right, and Anita, anything to say before we move on?
Yeah, I think it echoes starting points around becoming a political football.
Some research based on 829 American companies looked at different types of diversity implementation. And basically, some of it's working, some of it's not working, based on obviously these American companies over something like a 20-year period of intervention and seeing. And so what worked was like cultural inclusion training for managers. What didn't work was diversity training. And that was because it was focusing on a particular group. So when it's more cultural, then it tends to work. When it's picking on certain groups and other things that didn't work were around grievance procedures, basically. So I think we all are agreed that everyone is equal and we need diverse grouping. And again, to the points that have been made about looking to the long term. But I think that the reason that it's become a political football is because some of these interventions have not been working. But that isn't necessarily where the conversation is going. We need to bring it back to that conversation.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is one about resilience. Now, a lot of people say the problem with ESG is the acronym itself, ESG. And if you start putting emphasis on things like resilience instead, then maybe there wouldn't be quite the backlash. What are your thoughts about that resilience? Hot or cold, Lizzie?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So we shouldn't really be choosing between resilience and sustainability. They matter. And I've argued that the solution really lies in regeneration. So resilience helps us to adapt to shocks, to changes that are unexpectedly coming away, while sustainability focuses on long-term value and minimizing harm. Regeneration, on the other hand, goes beyond both. It's about actively restore and replenishing the systems we rely on. So, nature really shows us that balance. All the ecosystems aren't just resilient, they regenerate after disruption and they create abundance. So, businesses can adopt this mindset as well by designing these systems into their culture, into their governance, and also give back. So, for me, the focus shouldn't really shift have sustainability or resilience. Instead, we need to embrace regeneration as a next step in building thriving organizations and also goodness for the planet.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else want to come in on the issue of resilience? Julian.
Yeah, happy to jump in. Totally agree with what Lizzie said. And I think the point I would like to make is I think in the world and the question, in the way you frame the question is a good example of that. We tend to put things in opposition. And I think that's a mindset that is quite present. It's one or the other. And we really have that opposition across most of the narratives around. And I think we just need to start to put things together, right? And especially when we talk about sustainability and the challenges we have ahead, we need everything together to move ahead and really change that discussion from against to together. And that relates to the action we take, but also organization collaborating together when before maybe they were competitors through the formation of alliances, common funds, for example. That's what we might take on this.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Anybody else want to pick up on this? Okay. I mean, there's one thing that does concern me a little bit about the usage of the word resilience when people are talking about the supply chain. And I just wonder whether there's a danger of becoming the thin end of the wedge for just protectionism. Yes, we need resilience, but we don't want protectionism either. So that's my thought. What I'd like to do, before we move on, I thought we had an interesting comment here on DEI from Faisal. What about how many of the major companies are rolling back their DEI programs, preempting litigation? For example, on the basis of reverse discrimination. It's only a matter of time, as often happens, before the rest of the world follows suit. Anybody got any comments to make on that comment? Okay, well, I think we discussed DEI. I think you made your point well there, Faisal. It's it's a tough one. What I'd like to do now is turn to Kaushik and have a brief chat with you. So I'll just say goodbye to the other guests for a few minutes. And Kaushik, let me just quickly tell everybody about you. Kaushik Shritar is a purpose-driven sustainability leader with over 20 years of experience in corporate sustainability and ESG, advising organizations in strategies, reporting, and net zero initiatives. As the founder of Orca Advisory, he partners globally to deliver impactful sustainability projects. Kaushik is also an adjunct lecturer at the prestigious university, published author, and a TEDx speaker, recognized for his contributions with numerous industry awards, including ESG Impact Leader of the Year in 2023. A former professional tennis player, he holds a PhD from, I don't know if I can pronounce the next word, Macquarie Business School, if I said that correctly.
Almost, Michael. Macquarie.
Okay. And you did tell me the other day, by the way, that you got annihilated by Andy Murray once. Tell us about that.
I'm glad you didn't invite it to be one of the guests. So I'll just be completely candid. He beat me 6-0 in 26 minutes.
Oh dear. I'm pretty but then again, you used to be a professional tennis player. I'm pretty sure you beat me 6-0. Anyway, I've got a question for you. Leadership is critical, especially in turbulent times. In your experience, what qualities or actions distinguish effective ESG leaders, and how can they inspire trust and drive meaningful impact?
Thanks, Michael. It's a great question. And I guess my thoughts is probably not going to be anything new for the audience, but I think sometimes it's good to reinforce. So from my experience, leadership in this space, what it demands is a bit of a combination. And I don't, it could be seen as a unique combination of foresight, adaptability, and courage. So firstly, and this is something that I hold very dear to my heart, is ESG leaders need to be purpose driven. And we can't say that in a very tokenistic way, like in a seriously meaningful way. You got to deeply understand why your organization is pursuing these goals beyond regulatory compliance, reputation management, etc. So when you have that clarity of purpose, what it provides is a bit of a guiding star, and it helps you navigate what is potentially inevitable, complexities and trade-offs that you will see in this space. Um, Another quality, I would say, and this might irk you a little bit, is resilience. So the landscape of ESG is constantly evolving, right? Shifting regulations, global geopolitical issues, market expectations, social pressures, etc. So we as leaders, we've got to be adaptive, we've got to be situational, but we also need the resilience to adapt to these changes, making tough decisions. It may not always yield immediate results, but it's really crucial for long-term sustainability. And transparency is also, I think, a non-negotiable in this space. Trust, Michael, for me, is the currency of ESG leadership. Trust, and it's built by being honest about both successes and challenges. You reflect back to GRI, the principles from a couple of decades ago, and one of the key principles of GRI is balance. And how many sustainability reports can we authentically say has applied that principle in their external reporting? So leaders who openly communicate progress, setbacks, and learnings, I think they not only inspire confidence, but they also model that accountability that's needed to drive real impact. And for me, the last quality or characteristic or trait I would say is the ability to influence. And I can't underestimate the importance of that, and also collaborate across a diverse range of stakeholder groups that Julian alluded to earlier. That is quite critical because you're operating at the intersection of business, government, communities, environment, and so much more, right? So the ability to unite these groups, you're almost kind of like a politician, kind of, but just hopefully a successful one around shared goals and priorities, and that amplifies the impact. I still remember Patagonia. They've I don't know what people's views are on Patagonia, but they've been kind of a bit of a shining example around purpose-driven ESG leadership. Once they announced, what did they announce? They were in the business to save the planet. And, what better way to build a strategy around purpose than a tagline like that? So those would be my comments there, Michael.
Okay, and so with growing pressure to achieve measurable results, there is risk of ESG initiatives losing sight of core values. So how can organisations ensure they remain aligned with their foundational principles while navigating the complexity of ESG implementation?
Michael, this is a like for me, it's an OMG moment and an OMG question as well. And I hope your CSOs or listening in have some thoughts on this as well. This is a very critical question because it's about the doing. You want the dog to wag the tail, not the tail to wag the dog. So there's the increasing demand for measurable outcomes in ESG can sometimes tempt organizations, and I've seen this happen quite a bit in my time, to prioritize optics over authenticity. So staying aligned with your values, just reiterating myself here, requires an organization to try and embed the values. Every company has a set of values. So that's got to be embedded deeply into the decision-making process rather than treating ESG as an add-on or a box to tick. I think I recently saw a consulting company called Tick the Box Advisory. Amazing name. So the starting point is really to have a clear articulation of the organization's purpose and values. Got to have well documented, consistently communicated, regularly revisited to ensure they remain relevant in a changing world. I think purpose-driven organizations, and there's not a lot around, but they are there. I think they're generally, and during the pandemic, and there's a lot of research out there shows that they're better equipped to resist short-term pressures and really stay focused on long-term goals. I would say another critical factor, Michael, and we haven't touched on this a whole lot today, and I know, this is a an important part of one of the speakers today is governance. You got to have strong governance structures, like purpose-aligned ESG committees, board sub-sustainability committees. Got to have that regular oversight by the board to ensure that the values are kind of considered in very strategic directions. I think when leaders, you know, I don't know how to say this. Leaders, you've got to walk the talk. When you consistently demonstrate values-based decision making, especially in tough situations, it cascades throughout the organization. I've worked in organizations, for example, leaders who prioritize sustainable procurement even when it comes to a higher cost, or who stand firm on labor practices in regions with fewer regulations. What that sends is a very strong message about the primacy of values over expediency. So I guess my conclusion here, Michael, in my little rant, is staying true to your values in ESG. What it requires is an ongoing commitment to authenticity, principles, and being transparent about your achievements and challenges. And when you align your actions with these principles and you're transparent about the being priorities and the challenges and achievements, what you can do is ultimately safeguard your integrity while driving meaningful impact. So I hope that helps a little bit, Michael.
Thank you very much for that. It does indeed. I'd like to turn to Julian now. Hello, Julian. And I wanted to have a chat with you about my kitchen, because one of the appliances that's missing from my kitchen is a pressure cooker. And you seem to think that a pressure cooker has got something to do with leadership. So without going into too much detail about my kitchen, can you explain why?
Yeah, absolutely. And a pressure cooker is actually a very useful tool to have in the kitchen. I use that example really as a framework for sustainability implementation in an organization, and I hope that can be helpful for the audience here. And when we step back from what a pressure cooker is basically a way to cook things faster, right, compared to a normal pot. And I think when we try to think about sustainability, we are a bit in a race, and what we try to do is to accelerate the transition to something which is more sustainable. And so when we think about that, and when we think about the pressure cooker, we have mainly three elements. We have the top, the bottom, and the round structure. So the top is basically representing the C-suite, right? The top people in the organization. And the way to look and work with those people is really to be strategic and to adapt your language to those specific people, right? So when you will meet with your finance director, talking about cost and revenue, when you will talk with your operational director, talk about efficiency measures. When you talk with your marketing and business lead, talk about revenue and competition and risk, and so on and so forth. So really having a very strategic language for each of those key individuals at the top. Then you have the bottom, which is basically everybody with the rest of the organization. And there, I think that you need 2 points, right? First, knowledge. So really helping them get the right knowledge and information about the problems we have. And secondly, help them with the right structure for them to be able to raise their voice, suggest ideas, so we can add a bit of that pressure from the bottom. And finally, kind of like the third part, the round part, is about the processes in the organization. For instance, having clear OKR that can trickle down from the top to the bottom. We help all this organization function. And hopefully, with that top, bottom, and structure, we can accelerate the change in an organization.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Julian, you also told me you have a couple of examples of leadership in sustainability. Can you tell me more?
Yeah, I mean, I think they really come from everywhere, and where I've found really the most inspiring people, which I referred to a little bit earlier, is really within communities, and more specifically within indigenous communities. We might know, famous leaders of those communities, but I had the chance to meet so many more of them, and those voices are not heard, but they're really inspiring. And I related to that a bit with the orchestra and the kind of like sound man and engineer at the back. I really believe that the leaders out there, they exist. They are really everywhere. OKR is objective and key result, is a way to align organization goals with individual objectives, basically, Eric. And so really looking at the leaders around your communities, in your circles further away, that will not normally qualify as what we generally say a good leader is in the business or political world. For me, that's where I found the most inspiration. And I'm sure when we look deeply, we can find a lot of inspirational leaders around us.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Julian. I'd like to bring, and thank you for answering Eric's question so promptly. I'd like to bring Lizzie back on now. And Lizzie, I wanted to ask you, you said to me that sustainability officers will become redundant. Seems a bit drastic. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it does sound a bit drastic, indeed, Michael. I'm not trying to take anyone's job away. Absolutely not. So let me explain a little bit. Sustainability officers or sustainability teams, they are often quite siloed in the organization, and they often focus mostly on compliance, ESG reporting, or very isolated initiatives. And this can make sustainability in a company feel like an add-on, rather really being a core part of the business strategy. So what I envision is that sustainability shouldn't be the responsibility of just one person or one leader or one team even. It should be embedded in every role, every decision, every process. And you can imagine that sustainability will then be part of the DNA of an organization where leaders and employees at all levels are taking ownership. So, for example, you would then have supply chain managers that are automatically prioritizing nature and sustainable sources. You would have HR teams that design inclusive and eco-conscious workplaces. Product developers that would innovate with sustainability core what they do. And in that model, the sustainability officer, the traditional role then becomes more redundant, not because it's unimportant, but really because sustainability is then fully integrated across the organization. And instead, the sustainability officer that role would evolve into a strategist or more of a system linker that really ensures that the alignment and integration is there in the business, other than being that sole driver. And so it really isn't about diminishing the importance of sustainability or about taking away role. Really about embedding it so deeply that it becomes separable from the way we operate, the way we do business. And, to me, the ultimate goal is not to preserve the role, but to make the principles indispensable. So, yeah, wouldn't you agree, Michael, that a truly sustainable
Organization is one where every role embraces sustainability and not just one person.
Well, you're not going to get an argument from me, Lizzie, about that one. um, Anita, I'd like to bring you back now, and I want to ask you a little bit about the government's framework. How does that come into all of this?
Well, we've already touched on it in terms of orchestration. And how does the governing body of an organization direct, oversee, and be held accountable? So we've touched on the key principles. I think the key aspect to consider within the global context is just the sorts of conversations we're having now, the topics that we're addressing are just the ones that the governing body of any organization, any purpose-driven organization needs to consider and take seriously in terms of its responsibilities to the environment and society. And if we're to survive in the long term,
it's absolutely imperative that the governing body directs the organization in the right direction.
Okay, well, it'd be quite nice to survive in the long term, wouldn't it? I've got 3 grandchildren, so I think that it'd be quite nice to think that they will be around in a few decades' time.
Unlike the dodo.
Unlike the dodo, yes, I wouldn't want them to go that way. Max, I'd like to bring you on now, and Max, I don't think I've introduced you properly. So could you tell us a little bit about the sustainability circle, and then I've got a question for you.
Yes, definitely, Michael. So the Sustainability Circle is an invite-only community exclusively for sustainability leaders within organizations, and we focus on peer-to-peer professional development. I am one of the founders of the Sustainability Circle, and if you would join the Sustainability Circle as a sustainability leader, then we would match you into peer groups in order to really exchange with fellow peers on eye level to tackle and navigate the most urgent challenges, but also to share tips in order to save weeks of trial and error. Maybe that's a bit to the sustainability circle.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Max. And then you told me the other day you take the view that sustainability leaders, they're like fighting every day to make the case for sustainability as a value driver. So what do they need to do then?
Yeah, I mean, I already said it before, right? Being a leader in sustainability within an organization means being the manager of change, because the job of the sustainability leader is to embed sustainability into the core of the organization. Here I can just re-emphasize what also Lizzie had said. So this really means that we completely need to change the company culture. So as a sustainability leader, the continuous task is to drive this change, and depending on the type of stakeholder, educate the person, but also together with them to repeatedly build what we often call the business case for sustainability. This is why most of the successful sustainability leaders talk with loads of their internal peers and work together with them to build that case for sustainability for all of the core products, processes, and services. Because this is how sustainability gets embedded into the respective departments, and then in the end, into the job descriptions of the respective people who should have the responsibility. So to put that a bit into perspective, I just did a podcast with Surut Karatman, the global head of sustainability of Schneider Electric, which released an article where he made the bold statement, the role of CSOs as we know it should disappear. And what that means is that at one point, when the sustainability leader did a perfect job, sustainability will be so much embedded into the company business model, meaning products and services, that the right people within the organization have the responsibility for a part of sustainability. So that's, of course, a very provocative statement, but I think it can help to picture what the end goal should be and what sustainability leaders can aim for in the long term.
Okay, thank you for that. It kind of reminds me of the concept of what I call sustainability by design. The idea of sustainability being embedded deep into the roots of an organization. So they think sustainability as they're designing a product at the outset. What about examples making the case for sustainability and how the economy can grow whilst having sustainability? So, can you have a growing economy and sustainability at the same time? Can you give us some examples of how that might be possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Michael. Let me start maybe from a broader perspective. And let's ask the question, what if a company does not get on track with sustainability? I just read the other day a recent Harvard Business Review article. It is supported by a report from the Boston Consulting Group. And they actually found that the biggest risk companies face is actually inaction in sustainability. So what they found is that the cost of climate inaction could be up to 25% EBITDA by 2050. And while it's of course challenging to prove ROI in many cases, the cost of doing nothing is becoming clearer every day, and companies that act today will have a significant competitive advantage tomorrow. So what can we do? In many cases, sustainability professionals start by assessing, for example, the risk and dependencies of a company that can lead to financial loss, because this is how to gain trust and momentum among senior leadership in order to then get buy-in for more initiatives. Maybe take a look at a concrete example. You all know the German car manufacturer Porsche. In 2025, one of their key European aluminium suppliers experienced severe flooding due to an extreme weather event, leading to a significant shortage of specialized aluminium alloys. So the disruption of the supply chain affected many car series and led Porsche to manufacture thousands of cars less, which in the end led them to make 1 or 2% less revenue. And on the day this went public, the Porsche stock took actually a big hit. And this has been a clear environmental risk or local dependency scenario that turns to financial loss. So if you are able to quantify such scenarios, also in your double materiality analysis, you can take influence and suggest more sustainable options. And this is an amazing case where sustainability can work together with the risk and supply chain departments to build robust, sustainable supply chain.
Okay, thank you for that, Max. I'd like to bring everybody back on now. We will be finishing in a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you a couple of very quick questions. If you can make your answers as quick as you can. A piece of advice. Can you each give one piece of advice? Anita.
Yeah, I just want to.
Because I saw a comment by Kamala on communities and individuals, and that's really the advice I would give in terms of an organization. Look at your place in society and how you interact with communities and individuals, including those within your organization, as well as community action groups.
Is that the comment that you were referring to?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Piece of advice. Julian, and then Max.
Yeah, I think my quick one, especially in the second world, you will have to work with many people within organization and outside, as Rob mentioned before. And some will be, maybe ally, and some will be more like enemies or kind of like more difficult people. And you will have to work with those individuals. And so my piece of advice there is always trying to find a common ground with people that maybe from the outside you disagree on. Then most of the time you have common ground with individuals. And that's a good place to start engaging with people that may be a bit harder to engage with initially. So find common ground.
All right, thank you. And Max, you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I can just build on what Julian just said. I mean, I can say not give up, stay resilient, because I think working together with your peers to build the business case for sustainability in all parts of the business takes time. Educating and changing people's opinions within also an organization takes time because, again, this is a cultural transformation. So when change takes time, I think I all should realize that it's painful. People don't like change. So over time, I am sure that the small actions will add up.
Thank you for that, Max. Anybody else want to chip in with a piece of advice? Or
And made it quickly,
no, go for it, Lizzie.
the only small addition I wanted to make here is that I think, start with yourself, connect to your own essence, connect to nature, and be very small in first instance. Start with what really drives you, with your own values, your own passion, and really, make small steps. And by accumulating those small steps and by showing the results of that, make other people enthusiastic, and you take them along the way.
Okay, and Kaushik.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. All I was going to say is the world is too complex for rigid plans. So I think success comes to those who can pivot while staying true to their purpose. So that would be my message.
If only you'd remembered that when you were playing Auntie Murray. That's all I can say about that. Okay, we just need to wind up now. I just got one more quick question for you all. I want you to get your crystal ball out and a little bit of future gazing. What are your thoughts about the future? No more than 30 seconds. Who wants to go first? Right, I think we'll give that one to Anita and then you, Julia.
Children are the future. So a child told me the other day.
Nice and succinct and hard to argue with. Julian.
I'll try to be short as well, more local and less global.
So it's children, more local and less global. Anybody else?
Happy to throw something in, like Michael. So I think the future won't be easy. That's almost guaranteed. But I also think it doesn't have to be bleak. So we spoken about leadership. So thoughtful leadership, a commitment to shared prosperity. We've already got the tools, and we need to try and shape it into something remarkable because progress often emerges from the moments when we're most tested. So that would be my thoughts about the future.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Lizzie or Max, have you got anything any future gazing to do?
Yeah, sure. I'll share although and
Go for it, Lizzie. Then I'll let Max have the last word.
yeah, I mean, so the future really depends on our ability to adapt and to collaborate. So, I think we are already seeing, and I will continue to see businesses transform from purely extractive to regenerative models. And I'm really positive and hopeful that this be continuing. I see it around me, and I think the path won't be easy, but with the resilience that we discussed and the shared purpose, I think we'll get there.
Okay, thank you. And Max, I'll leave you with the last word.
Oh, am I having the final last words? All right, then maybe I don't speak about the future, but maybe with an encouraging statement. I think we all have this bold vision of making the world a bit more sustainable. I can just say you are not alone, and you don't need to have all of the answers, because many challenges that you all face have been already solved by someone else. So you only need to find the right peers to exchange with. And if you are searching for them, then of course go into communities and connect with like-minded leaders, because in most of the cases it has already been solved. You just need to find the right person.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, everybody. And we'll be back again in a few weeks' time. And hope you enjoyed the show today. Goodbye.